Hi friends, it's Sherry from Our Life Homeschooling, where I share homeschooling encouragement for everyday moms. I'm excited to share with you an interview that I had with my friend Kelly Crawford from Generation Cedar. Kelly is a mom of 11. She's been homeschooling for several years. She was the mom that I latched onto when I was beginning our homeschooling journey. About 14 years ago, she had a blog, generationcedar.com, and I read everything she wrote. She was that mom that was ahead of me. And if this is you, if you're a mom that's just starting out, I highly encourage you to find someone that's just a little bit ahead of you that you can learn from. It's gonna put you 5 years ahead. In this conversation, we talk about the difference between schooling and education and how we can hurt kids by not understanding the difference between these two. For so many of us who went to traditional school, it's hard to get out of that thinking. It's hard to think any other way, and homeschooling is just so different. So because of that, we put this burden on ourselves as moms of thinking that we need to do things a certain way. We make our kids' education harder than it has to be. I know I fell into this trap when I was a new mom of putting so much focus on academics and trying to do more than was necessary. And in fact, my kids learned so much more when we just relaxed. And this is what we're talking about in this conversation. Kelly has so much wisdom on this and so many great practical tips that you'll be able to walk away from today and just have some new, fresh ideas of ways that you can take the stress out of your homeschooling. So let's jump into this conversation. Hi, Kelly.
Hi, Sherry. Good to see you.
Yes, you too. And thank you so much for joining me. I'm honored to meet you. You've been that mom that is 10 years ahead of me that I looked to when I started homeschooling back in 2010 when there were no YouTube channels. There weren't even podcasts. I don't remember listening to any podcasts, nothing. I found your blog, don't know how I found it. And I just latched on and read everything that you wrote about. And you were the one that I was just taking notes.
Wow, wow. That I really appreciate you telling me that because that's my heart is to just encourage moms. And yeah, back then we didn't have a lot of outside encouragement. So I'm so glad that that was able to encourage you.
Yeah, yeah. Well, let's just dive in. I'm gonna have you, if you could introduce yourself and then tell my viewers what attracted you to homeschooling in the first place.
Wow, I have to think back really far. So I'm Kelly Crawford, and I'm a homeschooling mom and wife, and I have 11 kids. So we're in the 23rd year of homeschooling. I have 5 still in school. So yeah, a little bit more time left. But it's interesting how we came about homeschooling. I actually taught high school English when right not long after we got married, and I don't know. It was a combination of the Lord working in our lives. We knew several families who homeschooled, and I was always looking at their kids. You know, of course, we believed homeschooling was weird, just like everybody else kind of did. But I started looking at these kids, and I'm like, there's something different about them. And they just had a maturity and they had a respectfulness about them, and that was attractive. And then, as my husband and I think I was pregnant with our third when we started thinking about it we each, my husband and I had terrible experiences in the dating life, recreational dating life. And
Mhm.
as we started talking about that, we were thinking, how could we help our kids avoid some of those traps of recreational dating? And it's so prevalent in the culture. And it was kind of a connect the dot thing because we realized if we're going to try to do something different with our kids, then it's going to be very hard to do if they're in the middle of that culture. And so that started a spiral where we finally realized, okay, we're going to have to kind of remove them from that kind of culture. And we discovered there was this whole different culture where they could meet friends and peers that their families had kind of the same values in their mind, thinking the way we were thinking. So that started the process. Of course, after we began to research and read about homeschooling, we were convinced on so many other levels, besides just the one about wanted to get them out of that recreational dating culture. And now we were sold after I think it was Greg Harris. I found Greg Harris's teaching. He had a whole series on homeschooling, and we were absolutely sold after that. So the rest is history.
Huh. Oh, wow. I've never heard of him. I feel like I'm always Greg Harris. I'm always running into new people or new people in homeschooling, and that's one I've never heard of.
Yeah, he was one of the pioneering voices, I think, as far as I know, that really had. And back then it was cassette tape, so I had a series
Yeah.
of cassette tapes that we listened to in the car. But yeah, he was phenomenal.
Yeah. Wow. Um, so let's talk a little bit about the difference between schooling and education. I know this is something that you talk about a lot. You have a whole course that you kind of go through how this hurts kids when we don't understand the difference between schooling and education, and how we can just adjust our way of thinking to make make our learning environment one that just fits our kids' needs. So when you talk about how schooling and education hurts kids or not understanding the difference, what do you mean? What do you see? How is that hurting our kids?
So I'm going to go back to the classroom as an example, and I talk about the classroom a lot, even to homeschoolers, because that is our paradigm. That's what most of us, that was our whole experience, and so it's so prevalent in our thinking that we try to repeat it at home, and so that's why I go back to it. But as a teacher, and anybody who went to school knows this, what you have in school is you have good students and bad students.
Mm.
And we're all guilty of this. And what it looked like was, if you do well in school, if you are academically bent, those are the things that make a good student. And if you're not, then you're a bad student. And right out of the gate, we boil down what it means to be educated to whether someone is scholastically inclined.
Mm-hmm.
And then, you've got a few that fall in between where they're not really necessarily inclined, but they're pretty good at adjusting. But by and large, kids are just vastly different. And there are a number of ways to be smart. There are a number of ways, who was John Taylor Gatto said he was a former school teacher that I've read a lot. He's had a heavy influence on my thinking, but he said he's come to find out that genius is as common as dirt. We just don't know how to manage it. And we've
Yeah.
narrowed it down. We've tried to make schooling be the sum total of what it means to be educated, what it means to be smart. When in truth is, just because a kid is not academically bent does not mean he's not a genius in another way. And so schooling and education, in my opinion, are not the same thing. Schooling is a subset. Schooling is a fraction of what it means to be educated. And so, yeah, I think kids are, when they grow up in that environment, and I've got a video where I did an open letter of apology to a former student. I had kids in my class who were brilliant at some things, but they weren't academically bent. But what we did is tell them over and over and over that they were not measuring up. And so we have kids growing up in that environment, and we can do it ourselves to our kids in homeschooling. If you're not good at math, you are not going to be as successful as the one who is. And that's not the measure of what it means to be educated. And so these kids grow up like that, and I think they have to really, I think it takes years for them to recalibrate their thinking, and discover their worth and realize that they have their own geniuses, and what they were told all their lives is not true.
Yeah. And it just reminds me, I had a similar experience when I taught. I also taught in a public school, and just how we did as teachers, really, it was a reflection, or how our kids did on the test was a reflection on how we were doing as teachers. And I remember, I still feel guilty about this to this day. There was a little girl. She was the sweetest thing. This was fourth grade. And I knew she was just not going to pass the state test. I knew she wasn't. And we had recess at the very end of the day. So they had worked all day long. It's the very end. They finally get a break. And we were out there, and I was drilling her to help her. I wanted her so badly to pass this test. And when I think back now, same thing. It's like, I wish I could apologize to her because
Right.
for so much of her childhood was already taken away all day. And then for me to be drilling her in that one moment of freedom when she can just relax and yeah, so I can totally see that. And I think parents, because we grew up in in school, we have that same um, frame of mind that we just were afraid that our kids, if they don't do well in this academic world or in this certain way, then they're just not going to succeed. They're not going to do well in general. And it's just not true. And we just tend to push them. I remember being that way as a young mom until I started meeting other moms that were just saying, you know, it's that's not the only way to measure how a child is doing.
Right. Well, and it's interesting too, what is education then when we're trying to think of it, if education and schooling are not the same thing. I read an article by Forbes magazine recently about, the top 6 things that determines a person's success. And nothing in that article mentioned anything about academic prowess. It was things like emotional intelligence, very important. Relational, it was relational things. How well can you solve a problem? How do you manage money? What do you think about your financial literacy? And so they're just, yeah, like so many other things. And I think it's not that academics has to be pushed aside or anything like that, but I think as homeschooling moms, when we can finally get into our bones that an education is not the sum total of how my child performs with his textbooks or on his academic side, then it just takes a huge burden off. Because I mean, I've told moms who come to me in tears sometimes at conferences or what have you, and Johnny's behind in this subject or whatever. I said, honey, listen, you could just fail miserably in the academic section. You're still not going to ruin your kids. Like we think we have a lot more power than we have, I think, over our
Yeah.
kids. Um, you would have to put your child in a closet and blindfold him, to keep him from. God has put in our children and us the amazing ability to learn and to explore and discover, and it's not all on us. And we give ourselves way too much credit when we think that we can fail our kids. So I think my passion is to help moms understand that and to just relax. And then the textbooks or the academic part can take its proper place. And I like to say that, we do academic work, but it's a tool for us. It's our servant, not our master. And so if we can stop being enslaved by the bookwork,
Yeah.
it would help a lot and give our kids, they need a lot of time. Kids don't need to be sitting at desks for 6 7 8 hours a day. It doesn't take that. And that's what grieves me too about the idea of schooling, is all of this time that they're being robbed of, that they could be, growing,
Learning. Yeah.
and learning their interests and their bits. I think about all those teenage boys, like I said, that they didn't want to hear Shakespeare. They wanted to go do what they were good at. And
Yeah.
we didn't give them the time.
Yeah.
So
Yes, I agree. And people are so worried about being behind. It's like, well, behind what?
yeah,
Behind who? Who are you behind? What are you missing out on? I mean, this is your child. Your child's an individual. And yeah, I think or like I've seen new moms, they'll start homeschooling and then they're like, "Oh, I'm done already." And they feel like they should be doing more. And
right.
no, actually, you probably did more in that short period of time than you can accomplish when they're in school. And I think a friend and I were talking about this the other day, how people think that they need to get through 180 lessons in each subject for their child in a school year, and it's just this weight and this burden, and that's the total, that's a mindset that is so stressful,
Yeah,
whereas
it
we
is.
should just be looking at forward. We're moving forward, we're making progress, we're getting up and we're doing a little bit today, And then we're gonna, we're just gonna keep moving forward. And
Yes.
kids do need that free time. And I think when when we are relaxed like that, then people think, well, it can't be that good of an education if you're so relaxed. But we mistake how, like Charlotte Mason said, each child is a person, how much they are driven to learn. They love learning. And if we don't get in their way with all this busy work of things that they have to do to get to, to be finished. And our kids have a lot of free time. And when I started letting go of a lot of that and giving them more free time is when I saw them just flower, and they're all going off in different directions according to their interests. And I'm just amazed with the people they're becoming because they're
Mhm.
given a lot of freedom.
Yeah, I saw a great quote this week. I don't remember exactly, but it was something like no child was ever inspired to greatness through a worksheet or something like that. And so, what you were saying about all the busy work, it's just not necessary,
Yeah.
and just remembering that a cursory understanding. I mean, you can teach a child to read and write and communicate in a short amount of time, and a general education, general knowledge of mathematics, and after that, then yeah, you can't stop them from learning. And that's another one of my. I always remind moms, how did you teach your child to speak the language? It's a very important thing. If you failed at that, it would be bad, and yet you didn't stress about that. And I don't understand how that's any different. And it's really not. But we panic,
Yeah.
all of a sudden when they turn 5. Oh, now everything is up to me. If I don't impart this to him, he's not going to learn anything. I'm like, really? Because I think he just learned a lot in 5 years that
Yeah.
we're not even intentional about. So
Right.
being able to trust our children's instincts, and God created us like that. He created us to be driven to learn and to explore. And yeah, the freedom to do that is what our kids need.
Yeah. Yeah. I completely agree. So can you, for the mom who feels that pressure, I know I felt it when I was starting out, that weight. Can you think of some practical ideas, some steps they can take, even just today, to have a shift in their thinking, to look at their child's, to look at it not as school, but to look at their child as an individual and to think about their education and creating an environment that's just going to help them to foster that curiosity and that interest.
So in a practical way, my shift in thinking happened when I just started reading other opinions. Because again, if we have this only one paradigm of thinking, then there's nothing to challenge us. I mean, when I first started reading John Taylor Gatto, my mind was blown. I'm like, there's this school of thought that I had no idea existed. And
Yeah.
so I would
I
start
love
by,
him too. Yeah, he is great. Everything he writes is great. I love how he says we need less school, not more. It's so true.
yeah, and he had a pretty radical, I mean, he said some radical things. He's very critical of the idea of schooling altogether, and actually calls it an insane experiment. Because compulsory schooling is only about 172 years old. So in the history of mankind, it's a new experiment. And he said that, it's failing terribly, and we're raising children that never grow up into adults. He has a lot to say. Anyway, that's my number one suggestion. Go Google John Taylor Gatto and start reading some of his stuff. And I've got a lot of it, his quotes on my blog. You can read there at generationscedar.com. And then once let those thoughts marinate, and then just peel back what, if you're doing a really rigid school schedule, maybe peel it back. For us, I try to do, and because I think you're a Charlotte Mason fan, but we're big fans of real books, not textbooks.
Mhm.
We just don't do a lot of textbooks. I think math is the only textbook right
Mhm.
now. We may have some apologia in there, but just seeing that the world is such a big place, and um, reading real books and real experiences, historical biographies, and just getting to know people in history. There's just so many ways to get out of the mindset of textbook measuring, and just be open and help your children be open to, and ask them what's interesting to them. Like, ask your children what they're interested in learning. And if they don't know, or if they're not sure, just make resources available to them. I know some of my kids love going to the library. And even though we have a library in our home, having a new set of resources to look at sometimes is very inspiring to them. And I always tell moms this: whenever your kids ask a question, jump on that, and follow it through. Because the learning that sticks is when we ask questions and find answers to what matters to us in the moment, what's important to us in the moment. Just to put something in front of a child and say, you need to learn the law of, whatever, scientific law of whatever. Yeah. And if it doesn't meet him in real life, it's not as likely to stick.
Yes.
But in so many ways, that is, my little boys were playing with bubbles the other day, and they had they were blowing them out of a shape that wasn't round. So there was like a heart-shaped cookie cutter or something, and they made their own bubble. And so they were asking me why the bubbles were round. And so I looked it up for them, and we talked about the pressure inside and why the bubbles are round. Just a real quick little thing, but that multiplied across a number of instances where you're just kind of paying attention, and you're following up with things that they're already interested in or they're already asking about. Those kinds of things are very meaningful and tend to stick. So I don't know if that really answered your question, but just definitely do some research and reading. And if you want to fast track it, that is what my course is about. I have spent years reading John Taylor Gatto and marinating on his ideas and thinking and writing. And I had so many moms that would come to me and say, how did you do it? How did you get out of that thinking? It's got, it's so ingrained.
It's hard to get ahead of it.
It really is. And that's why I created the course. It's a very short little, like I said, fast track if you want to start there. But one way or the other, start to get those thoughts and get those other opinions into your mind, and help de-school yourself.
Yes. Yeah. And I've taken your course. Even as a mom that's been homeschooling for 14 years, I feel like I still learned a lot. And a lot of what you had in the course, I wish I had taken it like 10 years earlier, because then I would have been able to let go of some of those things. It would have given me the confidence to do what I already knew was best for our kids, but just didn't know how to make it flesh out in our daily school life. So can you tell us a little bit more about the course, how to take the stress out of homeschooling? This is, for me, I think this is something that young moms really need. It would be something that would put you 5 years, 10 years ahead of your time. It's like sitting down with a mom who's been there and can just say, look, this is what is not important. This is what you need to focus on. And it's not as hard as you think. This is how to get it done.
Right. Well, the course itself it's short. It's about an hour, a little over an hour, and it's a video. So you'll have prompts, visual prompts, and then my voiceover. But I essentially start by helping that deschooling process. And I can't remember, was it Semmelweis? Semmelweis was, I started out telling the story. He was a doctor that, before there was a microscope, he was the doctor that discovered why so many moms in the delivery ward were dying. And what was happening was doctors were, they were treating sick patients and doing autopsies actually on cadavers. And they were going directly from that and delivering babies. And all these moms were dying. And he put together 2 and 2 and suggested that if they would just wash their hands between patients, it would be, a tremendous help turns out it did. They started washing their hands, and the casualty or the death rate sorely dropped. However, he was ostracized and actually ended up being banned from practicing because they couldn't wrap their head around something that they had believed for so long, and they couldn't wrap their head around something being different than what they had been. You know, they thought they were doctors, they were trained, they had always done this the same way. And just my point in telling that story is that sometimes it's that drastic. We have to get out of a way of thinking that we've been ingrained in for so long.
Mm-hmm.
But looking back to those stories, it gives us the courage to say, okay, there may be something that I'm missing here, that even though I've thought this way for so long, it might be that that's not actually true, or that's not actually the only way. So I just start like that with a process of deschooling, and then I move into a lot more practical ideas for moms, you know, and how to flesh that out, practical learning ideas, practical ways to make learning more of a lifestyle than a school. So that's it in a nutshell.
Yes. And I really I enjoyed it. It's good even just for a refresher, because even when you know some of these things, that's how it was when I took it. So when I took the course, it was our 14th? No. Yes, it was our 14th year of homeschooling. So I feel like a lot of what you shared in there was kind of where I had arrived over the years, but even just hearing another mom, just the reminder again of just the importance of free play, and just, some of the things in there, copy work, how so much is covered in copy work. I mean, it's like I think of it as like a multivitamin. You're just getting so much in one place.
And how freeing, just that one thing is so freeing.
Yes,
When you
yes.
realize that, you know, copy work is enough and you don't have to do all of the other things. So
Great. Well,
that was
thank you, Kelly. I really have enjoyed this conversation. And can you just let my viewers know where they can find you?
Yeah, so again, my blog is Generation Cedar, cedar like the tree. And then I also have a YouTube channel, podcast can be found if you visit the site. So just look in the navigational tabs above and you should be able to find. I like to listen more than read, but yeah, I'd love to have. I've been writing there for quite a while. I redid the blog, but there's still so many articles there about relaxed homeschooling, about this, what we've talked about today. So I think that encouraged if you visit.
Yes, yes, definitely. And your podcast is something new that I've been really enjoying. So I hope you keep going with the podcast.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you, Kelly. Really appreciate you sharing this with my viewers. I'm going to be sure to link the e-course, How to Take the Stress Out of Homeschooling, in the comments below. So make sure you all take the chance to look at that. Thanks again.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed talking to you.
I hope this interview with Kelly has been encouraging to you. Again, I'm going to leave the links for her blog and YouTube channel, her podcast, and also the mini course, How to Take the Stress Out of Homeschooling. I'm going to put them all below for you. I hope this gives you some ideas and especially encouragement to keep doing the great work that you're doing with your kids. I do one video a week on homeschooling encouragement for everyday moms. I'll see you next week.